a frightening time. It was really a frightening time then. I mean, I think everybody was a little bit worried about, are we going to get attacked, or what's going to happen to us, or are we going to attack somebody? And these producer guys, man, especially the guys at AIP, they were very smart about this, and they knew what films to make.
Everybody was a little worried because Russia had developed a hydrogen bomb as well as the United States, and they both were devastating, and it surprised the U.S. military, I think, that the Russians were able to do it so quickly. But they had some captured German scientists. That's how we got it, too. I mean, it was, well, no, we developed it on our own, but the captured German scientists were helpful in developing rockets for us. I mean, it was an insane period, insane.
I think we were frightened of them because we didn't know at that time. We had the big standoff with Russia, and it got to the point where it was called mutual annihilation. So it wasn't quite as fearful, and the Russians didn't want to be annihilated any more than we did. But in the beginning, it was more tense. The world could have ended it at any. You go to bed at night, and maybe it would be there in the morning, and maybe not. But it wasn't something you could dwell upon.
I think there was a great deal of anxiety about the atomic, the atomic age, and there were a lot of things were just on the borderline about computers and about a lot of stuff, and people were extremely apprehensive about it. In fact, there were television shows that showed how ridiculous computers are and how when the computer gets confused and so on and so forth. So it was not only like that with computers, but there was a lot of anxiety with the atomic age, yeah.
There was a lot of technology being developed in the 50s, like transistors as well as 3D. And I'm sure, that people were wondering what's next. I mean, nuclear bombs were out there, and there was all kinds of technology that was new and could potentially be dangerous. It's almost, there's a parallel today. I mean, in the last 15 years, computer technology, you go back 15, 20 years from this date right now that I'm speaking, and you could see maybe a computer here or there. Now every business, there's a huge technological advancement happening, and we're so involved in it we don't realize how big it is. And I think new technology is something different, and change always can breed fear if you let it.
My remembrance of that period was that when the bomb dropped, one of the first questions in everyone's mind was, will there be a domino effect? Will there be explosions other places, and there'll be a chain reaction, and will it destroy the Earth? That was foremost, I think, in our minds. And I did a couple of shows that I touched a little bit on that. Space Children was one, and it was about the children taking charge and trying to stop the adults from destroying the world.
The Red Scare was going then. The atomic bomb was on everybody's mind, what it could do, the destruction it could do, the duck and cover the kids did in the schools, which wouldn't have done a heck of a lot of good, but nobody knew that at the time. So it was just inevitable they were going to start making movies about the atomic age. And they did. They made a lot of them.
Not only did it reflect the time, it reflected the whole genre of horror film for that era, which was based on fear. First we had Duck and Cover, and that started actually in the 30s for earthquakes, but as soon as the bomb went off, then it was for the atomic bomb, and no one got away from the cloud, especially if you were on the West Coast. It went so high that you could see it. So in our imagination, when we duck and covered, all we could see was that white light. So that was our fear, that white light, not understanding it, until we reach the age of reason. And then anxiety sets in because you understand why you're fearful. So the whole genre of horror film allowed people of that age, especially in the West Coast, to express it's for their own mental health, to express the horror they're feeling inside, but not being able to put words to it, not really understanding what that fear was about.
I think I've always been kind of an optimist, which has gotten me through a lot of things. And so I don't know, fear was not something I dwelled on. Let me put it that way. I was certainly against developing these super duper weapons, because it's very dangerous indeed, because some nut can go off the deep end and do great harm to all of us.
I married a doctor with the Atomic Bomb Casualty Commission about 5 years after the bomb. So my life changed drastically, and I became very much aware of radiation, and that you shouldn't eat broccoli and you shouldn't eat things that were absorbing the radioactive isotopes, and that you shouldn't have certain types of surgery. And there were things like that the doctors were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I can remember as a kid, of course, our big thing in school was, to, you duck and cover, and I look back at it now and I think, I mean, here we are, they're going to have us get under our desk, put our arms over our neck, and then I guess pray, because if that thing went off, I mean, who cares? I mean, the next thing you know, you'd be just evaporated, so yeah, it was not much that you could do, and that's, I think, a lot of people had that, well, it was a little bit of hopelessness, I guess, because of the atomic age, and how we had just finished, World War II, and we'd kind of saved the world, so to speak, and now were we going to be able to save the world from this atomic age that we were going into?
And that's the feeling that we had, how we felt from after the Second World War on, with the atomic age. Because we would see that cloud. We saw the atomic bomb. It was right there to the east of Los Angeles. Nobody could get away from it. It was so big. And they tell us, oh, the wind is always going in that way when they put it out. When that bomb goes up, the wind's always going that way, and we're going, it's awfully big, that cloud. So we were living that. We were living, we're all making plans thinking, but it could be the end of the world next year or tomorrow.
I think horror films reflect the times we live in. And I think, whether directly or indirectly, I think that's a wonderful way to look at horror films. It was an age of innocence, and it was an age of, it was a time of innocence, but there was really scary stuff going on. So I think to release that fear in an innocent way was really cathartic in the late 50s, early 60s. And I think that's why people loved horror films. It was sort of, well, there's also the whole concept of the monster kids, sort of the disenfranchised kids sitting in the audience. My dad's films were very much influenced by what was going on in the times, and I do think that the atomic age, the bomb, the world's being annihilated, all that stuff is really, really scary. And I think the horror films of the generation sort of depicted those fears.
Well, I think it boils down to free will. In the Baha'i teachings, it says, split the atom and you will find a son of power, and he hoped that man wouldn't find it till he knew how to use it constructively. And that's the key. If we use our innovations, the age of information, everything that's going on, high tech, talking to your watch, to your mother, whatever, things, the screens are getting smaller and smaller. It's how we use it. We have the instrumentality to bring peace on earth, goodwill toward men. It all depends on how we use it.
Oh, I definitely think that your big bug pictures, them and all those things with the atomic radiation stuff, and like that, yeah, that came from the bomb stuff. I mean, because you heard almost some, because when they tested these bombs and they had animals in some of them, and some of them did get weird and stuff like that. I'm sure they had some mutations and stuff. Well, radiation, they proved, will do that. And what's to stop some mad guy of doing something like that? If he gets a chance, he may do it. And it could still happen. And it maybe even is happening somewhere that we just don't even know about. Like, well, okay, it's a film, but could those atomic things we're doing out in the desert out there, and over in Las Vegas, are we going to see some big giant things coming in Vegas one of these days?
And I did run into a wonderful physicist at Caltech. I've forgotten his name, Naj, I think it was. He had discovered a particle at the time, and he thought War of the Worlds was perhaps his most favorite movie because of the atomic bomb. He said you actually used the atomic bomb in the movie, and it didn't do any good at all. It didn't work. I mean, they had men being blown off the top of trucks with the after blast of that bomb. No, we were entirely too close. And I love it. Everybody had some sort of waste management protective clothing on, and they just stuck goggles on me.
I think it is something we do have to worry about. Personally, if anything like this happens, it won't come from either Russia or China. It'll come from some little offshoot, but once it does happen, then it could be disastrous. I mean, there's no doubt if there's a nuclear war where both sides, it's the atmosphere, the whole thing is going to be changed on the Earth. Well, the Earth, of course, is being destroyed anyway, little by little, little by little, little by little. Every day a new species ceases to exist, and it's terrible. We pollute everything. This is one of the things that I think really should be addressed, the destruction of our planet.
We got through it. They all got through it. Movies made a lot of money. Everybody was very happy, and so. But it was a profitable time for the studios, especially the independents that could make these things. But it was a rough time. It was very scary. I mean, you'd go to bed at night, and my folks would worry, And we even had in Burbank here, we had air raid sirens, and they do these air raid tests all the time. Boy, there's nothing scarier than that kind of a siren. That is really a horrifying, just wail thing it does. And then we'd have these blackouts. You'd have to put your shades down, turn your lights off and stuff, and you'd look outside and it's dark. You can't see anything. Street lights were off for about an hour. They would do this. It was panic time.
Science fiction became before, and people got interested in what's out there. And I think that had something to do with what we finally did about it. Science fiction has had a lot to do with all kinds of, how many science fiction writers have predicted exactly what's going to happen? The atomic bomb, all sorts of things like that.
Yeah, I think that, with the bomb scare and all that kind of stuff, science run amok and things, all of a sudden you start seeing things like The Fly, or the mad scientists just started creating stuff like that. And the thing is, there was a little bit of truth to that, possibly. Because this bomb thing was pretty weird. Maybe they can clone people. I don't know. Possibly. They've done it with animals. It could be done.
I think tampering with evolution or life is something that is always kind of scary. I mean, you can go back to 1931 in Frankenstein, and there was this guy wanting to create life. And Jurassic Park and things is where you're looking at genetics and DNA and trying to develop life from remnants of life.
When we bought this house, it was advertised with a bomb shelter. One of the early owners of the place got mad at the Edison company, so he built this house down there, which is now rented as a guest house, but to house the electrical, and it was really built solid concrete, reinforced concrete, and so that's what was considered the bomb shelter. I became aware of it then, but that was in the early 60s. Yeah.
But those days were, they were tense. I mean, you know, my folks were very worried, you know, and a lot of people built bomb shelters, stuff like that, and I mean, physically build them. I mean, now it's still bad now, but nothing like that. That would look like it was on the edge of something happening pretty quick. And who was going to strike first was the whole thing. And then McCarthyism, oh my God, how many people's lives did that wreck? On account of fear, here again.
People building their bomb shelters in their backyards and panicking every time they heard something on the radio. They'd run down there and live there for a week and have practice sessions with their families. My family never did that, but I'm sure it was a big scary thing in the 50s and 60s.
I knew people who had bomb shelters in their backyard, and in fact there was an actress I worked with briefly named Peggy Weber, who does radio work now, and she was married to an eye doctor, and she lived down in the canyon here, and they had a bomb shelter. I remember we rehearsed in it a couple of times. It was a strange experience. I was thinking, I don't think this would really help. If anybody detonated a really significant atomic weapon anywhere near you, it's doubtful that anything would not be incinerated.
Then we built a bomb shelter, and that was very entertaining because the neighbors were terribly upset that we were building a bomb shelter. And we took the whole front yard and excavated it and built a very costly bomb shelter with water and supplies to keep people going for about 6 months. And Lee Marvin was one of our neighbors, and his wife came over and she said, "Don't you realize people will be coming with guns trying to get into the bomb shelter?"
It's so silly. None of that would have done any good. Radiation would have gotten no matter where you were. And people were building shelters in their backyard, you know. Bomb shelters. There's no protection from the atomic bomb.
For me, it was fun because I used it to rehearse plays. I would take the crowd down there, and we could scream and holler and nobody could hear, you know. And so when I had children that I had to put to bed first, it was a good place to go because we could rehearse and not disturb anyone.
Well, living in the era of the 50s and the new atomic bomb, and we're all going to be blown to hell any minute, that was kind of real. I can remember, I think during Bay of Pigs, that possibly LA was going to go up in an atom bomb. But that passed, like most threats pass.
Oh yeah, I'm sure, you know, after the atomic bomb drops, people were afraid that it could happen here. I mean, Japan invaded Pearl Harbor. Could it be, you know, could there be a bomb dropping in Iowa? That fear is there. And those films, a lot of them had people surviving after nuclear holocaust. And again, many of them reflected on the sociology of how we would react, and maybe bringing out the good and the bad in people because they were in a situation where there weren't many people left. The law was gone. There was no law and order. And you see society break down in a micro group of people.
I want to get out! I can't stand this! You can stay in here if you want to, but you're not going to keep me in here! I'm going to get out! I want to get out!
Welcome to the group. Didn't know there was anybody in the truck till we heard all the ruckus. What do you got in there?
Well, I was very well protected in the 50s. I came from England at that time, brought over by Walt Disney to do a movie for him, which I actually didn't wind up doing. He sent me back to England, And I stayed there until MGM called for me. And I arrived and went to school on the lot at MGM in the Little Red Schoolhouse. And I was a very young actress. I was 15 years of age. I had started working at age 6 in London. I was not aware of war as much as I was in Britain, because when I lived in London, I grew up during the Battle of Britain, and we were bombed every night. In fact, as a child, one of the prized possessions that you could own would be a cigar box, and in that box you'd keep fragments of bombs called shrapnel. And we'd take that to school every day and say, I've got a better piece than yours. This is a wonderful piece of shrapnel, you know. So I grew up very war conscious in Britain.
I mean, I can remember in the 50s as growing up, one of my good friends, we were very close, and his parents got a divorce. And we would actually, and this is when I was in college, and we went over and tried to talk his parents out of getting divorced because that just wasn't something that you did. And I think back, I mean, how naive were we? But I mean, you know, but yeah, it was like you say, that yeah, the 50s, everything on the surface was neat and wonderful, and everything underneath, you know, was this churning, bubbling thing down there.
And they were, you notice they were all perfect families, a little unrealistic. Never had any problems, no dysfunctions. That's why I like the Donna Reed show, you know, she was supposed to be so perfect, and, you know, always there to resolve the problems.
So that was a very terrible time in the 50s. And of course we were also blinded by it. We were very innocent people. And, you know, everything was easy. You'd walk in Central Park. There were no fear. I would go to work. My door was open. I never locked. But today it's a whole different world.
Well, it was early on in my so-called career, right around 1950, when they were bringing in for the first time Cinerama, and then CinemaScope, and and Panavision. Nobody knew which way to go. So for a while they just shut down until they ironed out which system they would use. And meanwhile, SAG also signed a contract with the producers that allowed them to make television films. And so suddenly, from 1952 on, when that contract went into effect, the rest of the 50s was just was like madness out here. You could work, there was so much work, because for the first time they weren't tied to live television and the hated kinescope, which was not a satisfactory way to reproduce the show. They had it on film, and then you could re-show the film over and over again. During that time, a lot of actors who'd been working in New York came out here to the West Coast because this is where the work was then. One year, in 1959, toward the end of the last decade of the last year in the 50s decade, I worked 57 times in 1 year, because there was so much work to be done. And you could work on 2 shows on the same day. You'd finish, if it was they'd have a series that shot for 2.5 days, and on the half day you could sometimes get another job for the afternoon. I mean, it was crazy.
You've got 2 parties, Democratic and Republican, fighting all the time and saying such horrible things together. I never remember, in the 50s, you know, you'd mix with the Democrats and the Republicans, you'd have lunch, you'd talk, you'd laugh, you had strong opinions, but that was about it. But today, you hesitate to have a Republican to dinner because it's going to be an awful dinner party. It's true.
I was born in Denmark, and I never heard of science fiction until I got over here in 1938. And then I met Sturgeon, Heinlein, Hubbard, L. Ron Hubbard in New York, and they got me interested. And then I started reading it, and I found out that the good science fiction is really fantastic. a lot of science fiction predicts what actually is going to happen. And that made me very interested.
I used to read Astounding Science Fiction you know when I stopped reading it? In 1948, I read the first thing about Dianetics. L. Ron Hubbard was a contributor to Astounding Science Fiction, and he wrote space operas. And he also chose a science fiction magazine to make the announcement about this great discovery of his called Dianetics, which morphed into Scientology. And that showed up first in a science fiction magazine, where it still belongs at best. I know, they'll come and haunt me now, you know. You daren't criticize them in any way. And as I say, John Campbell was a very good writer himself, and the thing is based on who goes there. Very ingenious idea.
I watched The Thing. It scared the heck out of me. The Day the Earth Stood Still. The Man from Planet X scared me too. So those, I always, I like that stuff, and I used to always draw spaceships. And I used to have battle scenes with spaceships and stuff.
Well, I think in the 40s, when you had like the scary films, the horror films and stuff, you can only go so far with them, I think, really. And I think ideas started kind of fading away, or, I mean, how many mummy pictures can you make? I mean, even when I saw not the Karloff mummy, but the other mummies, and he walks so slow, you could be 100 miles away from him. He'd never catch you, things like that. But then in the 50s, it all changed, and then you had your invasions coming in. The Thing, which I thought was an incredible film. I really enjoyed that. Or you had The Fly. Now that was, here again, that's a science film, pretty much, and the sequels and stuff, more even scientific and stuff, which is great. But it just seemed to go that way. I guess it goes where the audience is, and maybe the audience was just kind of stopping to try to see the mummy, try to catch somebody or something. I don't know.
People like to be scared. Even today, look what they do. They scare people to death, and they love it. So I guess it's that element of our society that
because we can fantasize and we can get away from our regular mundane world. We weren't really quite sure if there was anything out there, so to speak. I do have a little bit of an experience where I actually saw a UFO. At least I thought it was, and the gentleman that I saw it with, an older man, he was a neighbor down the street, and I was walking down, and this flying object came over us and made all of these 90-degree turns and things that normally aircraft can't do. And it did these things, and we were talking about it, and I ran home and told my parents. And of course, and they didn't see it, so they weren't sure. But I think it's because it's the unknown, and we're curious, and we want to know.
As a kid, I loved them. I loved the Frankenstein movies. I loved being scared. I mean, I can remember that, my parents weren't crazy about my going to see him because I would be scared. But I managed to get in, and then I remember once at a Frankenstein movie, I got down between the seats and looked just between the seats like this at the screen. So I loved them as a kid, even though they scared me to pieces.
As children, I think you have all experienced it. Are you experienced with your own children? Are you experienced as a child of your parents hiding in the closet and all of us jumping out and saying boo? And you giggle, and it scares the daylights out of you, but it's love. It's an adrenaline rush. And when they make these old horror movies and everything, and the guy creeps around in the shadows, and you say, oh, here he comes. You know what's going to happen, and when it happens, you jump out of your chair. That's exciting. Plus, if you got your little friend with you, and you're all screaming and yelling together, it's a together thrill, like getting on a roller coaster. You know, you're scared to death, but you like that adrenaline rush, and you love doing it with somebody. And with an audience, you see the blob or you know, the creature from outer space or something like that. It's just it's an excitement, a momentary excitement that's not something that happens to you all during the day. I mean, you go to a movie, you go there to be scared.
I think they made us look elsewhere. We needed a relief from all that because it was pretty shocking stuff what was happening at the time. And well, we didn't quite realize how shocking it was, but it was. And so anything that came along, including noir, goofy comedies, that was the heyday of that. And movies have such an enormous effect on everybody. You know, it's wonderful. I love it.
I think that definitely it plays on fears within human beings of the lack of knowledge about the results of science. I mean, it's kind of like the big controversy about stem cells. You know, it's fear of the unknown. So, I learned the wisdom of my mother from there too. But yeah, I really do think that it's a fear of the unknown, and therefore people like being scared because you haven't experienced without the consequences. That's a lot of stuff that happens in movies. You see, you can go to war and never get shot at.
I think fear of the unknown is always something that scares the public, whether it be back in the 40s, the Val Lewton films like The Cat People, where there was just all the fear and the horror was from shadows and things that you thought were there. And that extrapolates right into the 50s when you're talking about, you know, will we be invaded from outer space? Will a nuclear bomb be dropped here? There was, you know, fear everywhere can be found and exploited by movie makers, and it certainly was through the 50s.
I didn't know much about science fiction, quite frankly. Just George Pell and Destination Moon, and When Worlds Collide. Science fiction. Sally Field's mother, Maggie Fields, I had done a television show with her, and I had never really heard about extraterrestrials. And she was quite a sci-fi enthusiast and used to go out to the valley and claimed that she had close encounters and got me very interested in it. And so, but then I soon forgot about it, and then suddenly I'm cast in this. But just to be with George Pell, that was the thrill. I had to be in a George Pell movie. And of course, they're under contract to Paramount, and I'm a novice. You know, brand new movies, science fiction. I mean, Technicolor and my widescreen and stereophonic sound.
I didn't believe that aliens were going to come and land here. And for one, if you know anything about astronomy, there's absolutely no place that's within reach of here at the speed of light. Assuming you could get something cranked up to that speed, there's no way to do it. I mean, it would take so much energy to do that.
Technology as an updated form of magic. Very interesting concept, because once we take something from the unknown world and bring it to the known world, it's not magic anymore. But the audiences, they want to see magic. They want to be magically moved out of their humdrum lifestyle, you know. And so, yeah, I think across the board, it's the appeal of Harry Potter. It's what audiences want of, as Disney said, from 2 to 92, you know. To help lift them out of. Here again, you know, the tremendous technology advances we've made, I think, again, it becomes a question of what do you do with it?
I think people are fascinated with outer space, always have been. And, you know, you add in a planet, you know, populated by sexy women in scanty costumes. I mean, how bad can it be?
I was a part of the Universal International New Talent Program. They would put young people under contract and train them. We had school 5.5 days a week. We'd get like report cards. And part of the program was, you know, 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks. And we would go out and we would train them. And part of the program was, you know, 5.5 days a week. We'd get like report cards. And part of the program was, you know, 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks. And part of the program was giving us work in films that were being made. They would hire us to play smaller parts, and that way they wouldn't have to go off the lot to hire actors, and the school could charge our fee to what the school cost.
I was cast in Queen of Outer Space because I was one of many young actresses in Hollywood at the time. You know, that was in the 50s. That was really the time when the studios had their young star system, which was a wonderful, wonderful thing because you were signed under contract to a studio and they really looked after you. You went to acting classes, you went to dancing classes, you went to singing classes, and I was at MGM and very, very protected by the studio.
I was a contract player at Universal, of course, and I was always eager to find out what my next assignment was going to be. And I got this, and I thought, oh, the creature from the what is this, you know? And I read it, and I thought, oh dear. And then I thought, well, if I turn it down, I'll be on suspension, I won't get paid. And then I thought, well, what the hey, it might be fun. And of course it did turn out to be great fun. But if anybody told me we'd even be sitting here talking about it all these years later, I would have said, are you out of your mind?
And under contract to Universal, it was a blessing. If you're under contract, you don't have to be there normally until you're filming. But at Universal, they had this actors training sessions. But Universal was a great asset to me for the future. I learned what a producer did, a director. And they had little slots, or any fan mail that came in would go into the actor's slot. And the fan mail meant a lot to them. If you had a lot of fan mail, no, you're moving up. And I used to go in there about every 2 days, and I would take new fan mail, and I would also double up on what was already there. And after about 2 weeks, I was getting more fan mail than all of them put together.
It's the only studio I was ever under contract to, and I loved it. I was so grateful that they took me, that they signed me. I was forever their slave or whatever. I mean, I was just a bag of gratitude that they took this Minnesota farm girl and decided to do something with her. So and when they let me go, I was very sad about that, because I couldn't go out to the studio anymore. And I had a lot of friends out there in makeup department and wardrobe and so forth, and go to the commissary and have lunch and visit with all the people. All those good things were gone. And would I ever work again? That feeling never left. And so throughout all the years, every time I finished a picture, even including The Leech Woman, will I ever work again?
When I went under contract to Warner Brothers, as this kid, it couldn't have been more perfect, because as a contract player in those days, first off, you got any kind of lessons you wanted from the best in the world. The best dancers, the best singers, the best boxers. Mushy Callahan, light heavyweight champion of the world. I learned to fight with Mushy. He had all these facilities. You could go to watch dailies anywhere and see what everybody else was doing and how they did it. And you could go to the sets and learn. And so it was an absolute miracle for me. I love the contract system because it's the only way you could become a pro. There's nobody like that now.
I started out in movies being under contract to 20th Century Fox, and I made 14 films there in 3 years, and then they dropped me, and I freelanced for 9 months, and then I ended up at Universal. And I guess Universal was the best.
In the 50s, that focus on being beautiful, well, it certainly got your foot in the door at the studios. However, there was a big thing happening in New York, the Actors Studio. And there was a lot of movies that were like, the males really weren't heroes. Marlon Brando and Montgomery Clift, they didn't come in with the John Wayne hero kind of thing. They had problems, they suffered, they cried, they did this, they did that. So there was a whole new turn in the 50s. And if you see a lot of Eva Marie Saint was very attractive, but she certainly wasn't what you would call beautiful. And there was a big turnaround because of the Actors Studio. And it was wonderful because there were actors that got to go into film and have a profession that weren't considered beautiful. When I came to LA, the studios were just on the tail end of any kind of star system. I would say Marilyn Monroe, Yvette Mimieux, Kim Novak, they were probably few of the very last stars. That all ended, that star system. And then the Actors Studio came in very strong. And there were a lot of movies, down kind of movies, real stark, black and white stark movies, you know.
Sandy Meisner was, I think, the finest acting teacher I worked with, and I worked with a lot of people over the years. And Sandy was the best. He was my first teacher. I went to the neighborhood playhouse, I guess, in 1940 when I was about 16. And Sandy was just basic, great teacher. And I still use his technique of wondering where I came from, where I'm going, and I used it. I use it after 70 years of working. I use those things automatically. I don't think I think about them anymore. They're instinctive.
I was under contract to Paramount Studio at the time, and I read just like everybody else did, you know, and I was a member of the Golden Circle, which was like a variety of young starlets. Actually, the Golden Circle started way back in 1922 with Gary Cooper and Fay Ray. A lot of people were members of it, so they just continued it on through the 40s and then the 50s. And everyone was read. I had just signed a contract, around September, October, and they were looking for someone to match Gene Barry. And at the time, you know, I had a picture of myself on the table, what I looked like at the time, with a short, bright red poodle cut, very glamorous. And they said, no, she doesn't look, you know, really the part. They put me in what they used to refer to as the fishbowl. And it was a room with a plate glass in front of you, and everybody sat on the other side of the plate glass in lounge chairs and used to watch us every Friday. So I went up there. My knees were shaking. I'm telling you, I've never been any more frightened in my life to look at George Pal, because I knew him from the Puppetoons. I grew up with Puppetoons. And to read for him was a big thrill. And of course, Gene Barry wasn't a bad-looking fellow either. So I read, and they said, well, you don't look the part, but we're going to make you look the part. So they put 2 wigs on me, a hairpiece in front, page boy in back, took off my false eyelashes and all my glamour, and I was a little girl from Covina or West Covina, someplace over there, east of us, east of LA.
My dad used to say that horror films were a form of catharsis for audiences. He always felt that what happened in horror films was people got to go and kind of escape, but they also got to release all their stress and tension, and the 50s were a time of amazing tension. I mean, not just because of all the nuclear threats, but also blacklisting and McCarthyism. My dad himself was greylisted during the McCarthy era, which was a horrible thing for, you know, the industry and the country as a whole. But for my dad, he was a workaholic and he didn't work for over a year. And so certainly for him, horror was his own kind of personal redemption and release from the greylisting. But I think for the country, yeah, absolutely. It was a place where all those sort of latent fears that in the 50s we didn't want to talk about, we didn't say things like cancer, you know, and so it came out in the films.
in that time period, during that Cold War period that you're talking about, Russia was a big enemy. And I'm sure as far as the Russians were concerned, U.S. was a big enemy. And even though they were always afraid one or the other was going to push the wrong button and cause the war. And I'm sure Russia, the USSR felt the same way as the United States did against the USSR. So that was a very common theme to use in a movie at that time.
I think our government, in fact, I forget who it was, but some Secretary of Defense said we can only spend all this money on defense if we scare the hell out of the American public. I forget who it was, but it's a quote somewhere. And that's exactly what they did. I mean, the Russians lost something like 30 million people or something in the war, and they were decimated. They weren't going to march through Europe. None of that was really real, and yet it was sold to us as if this is what justifies all this expenditure in armaments and everything. And well, it made a lot of people really wealthy, and it kept a lot of jobs going and defense plants humming. But I mean, was it? I think it was a
terribly, terribly tough time, especially for actors, because the McCarthy Committee, those Red Scare committees, were after publicity. They weren't out getting mailmen and calling them before. They were calling actors before and writers, and it was a bad time. I still remember what Lillian Hellman, a tough lady, said when she was called before the committee. She said, "I will not answer those questions." She said, "I will not cut my conscience to suit the fashion of the times." Nice line. And, people who did, actors who went before because it was awful for them. But of course the committee would not let an actor off the hook. Somebody like Larry Parks, who was a marvelous person, and got caught up, and his career was ruined, just ruined. Loads of people.
Yeah, social and political, at that time, the McCarthy era, and it had a big effect on George Reeves and me, because one of our cast members was taken away by the FBI. So we got busy on that. But for the most part, yeah, even the Actors Lab, I attended which was behind the old Schwab's down in the gully. And they were from the group theater in New York. And they were most of them were communists. Yeah, it was amazing, that type of thinking. But they were right, there were communists in the government.
I found out at the lab I was being educated too. I was being educated politically, not overtly, you know what I mean? But I was around people who were liberal, who later were called communists. Maybe some of them were, and a lot of them weren't. But in those days, you had a guy named Joe McCarthy, senator from Wisconsin, Tail Gunner Joe, who decided there were X amount of communists in the State Department, had this list. He had decided there were communists all over Washington. So, then there was a guy in California named Jack Tenney. He decided a lot of communists in California too, probably at the Actors Lab. And maybe I think Russell Johnson's probably one of them.
I was very aware of the turbulence, of the controversies and so on happening, and I was involved too. I mean, the thing about a number of entertainers is that we become somewhat activist in things we believe in because we're asked to, we're known, so the idea is maybe we might have some influence in the direction that we subscribe to. So I was strongly anti-communist because there were communist inroads that had been made into the film business. There was McCarthyism, which I think went too far, but there was legitimate reason for it. And there were communists who would work their way into the entertainment business and were promoting their agenda in films. Ronald Reagan, who became a friend of mine, was involved in the awareness and in trying to expose the plans of communism in America to infiltrate entertainment, education, and the media.
Because at the Actors Lab, they were all, most of them were card-carrying, and if not that, pinkos, as they called them. Yeah. And one time, when I was being interviewed for a movie with Richard Conte, the brothers Rico, the casting director, Buster Vogel, said, "We've got your name down here, that we're at the Actors Lab, we're all communists." And I blew up. I said, "I went there on the GI Bill. I'm a veteran. I'm in the United States Navy." I said, "Check it out. Call the United States government." And he said, "Well, calm down, calm down." But I just blew up. Overthrow the government? No, absolutely not. I mean, people like Rose Hobart and Larry Parks. I could go on, Mary Tarsai, Morris Karnofsky, Roman Bonin. Tony Quinn directed me in a play at the Actors Lab. Anthony Quinn. Communist? No, no. No, there was never any threat. But the only criticism I would have of all those people was that they did try too much to keep all of the work in Hollywood in their corner and nowhere else. They tried to kind of monopolize, like some movies that everybody on it were connected with. But as far as the threat to the government, I don't think so.
The industry became the target of the Red Scare because we were the propaganda makers. We were embedded with communists. And overnight, so many movie families were affected. Their whole careers were ruined. And my best friend's father, who had just won an Academy Award for Destination Moon, was labeled a communist and blacklisted.
I was never a communist, never. Anyway, in those days too also, before the networks got control, the advertising agencies made the television series, made the television shows and sold them to the network. So every advertising agency had its own blacklist. Hey, you go for a job, oh, hey, you're on the list. You can't work here. Everybody had a blacklist. Everybody decided who you were. It was a time when people were accused. And you had to prove your innocence, in a sense. Otherwise, it was a frightful time. It was a frightful time. I was scared a lot of the time.
Oh, I was very liberal. And I went around spouting communist ideology. I thought the greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of people was just the greatest thing. And I never looked too carefully into that sort of thing.
I was blacklisted. Yep. I didn't know it. My agent was Paul Kohner at the time, and Paul called me in one day and said, there's a book out And I said, well, yeah. And he said, yeah, it lists people. And he said, I've checked on it, and you're in it. I said, oh, wow. He said, were you ever a communist? I said, no. No, I never joined anything like that or anything else, as a matter of fact. And he said, well, we're going to get you off the list, which he did. Yeah, he was very good about that. But it was a lot of friends who didn't work for years. That was, your worst enemies came out of the woodwork and said, gotcha.
I know that the studio didn't want us talking about McCarthy, and they would send us out on tour to plug movies, but they would say, no, don't talk about McCarthy. And if they ask you about McCarthy, say, you just don't know because he's from another city and you don't know anything about him. They were really afraid of our talking about McCarthy.
And another aspect of it that related to the time was that Sam Jaffe was apparently blacklisted, and they wanted him to be the professor, obviously, and the casting people came back and said, we can't use him because he's on this blacklist. And so apparently it was the producer, Blaustein, and the I guess the overall head of the studio, Zanuck, said, hey, we're not going to honor that. We're going to use him, and you know, so we got a really good performance out of him. I mean, who else could have played that part but him?
Well, McCarthyism, well, that was ridiculous. I mean, it should never have happened. Horrible, horrible man. And Roy Cohn, terrible man as well. And that was a very, very bad time. And then, of course, the fear of the atomic bomb. I mean, that was a real fear that we had. And thank God it never came to pass. But now, when you think about today, it's much worse.
And at that time, personally, I was very young. And I was more concerned with getting work than what was going on in Washington. The McCarthyism, the things that hit Hollywood, some of them I didn't like. I didn't like what was happening to some people. Personally, I'm more conservative politically, but I didn't like what was happening to some of my more liberal friends just because they were liberal.
McCarthyism targeted the industry, and just the industry. And it was the most intense form of bullying and caused so many divisions within the industry, and it really was the end of the happy-go-lucky time of Hollywood. It was never the same after that. There were deep divisions that could never be mended, but on the other hand, it created a mindset for a future generation of filmmakers.
You mentioned the McCarthy era. I remember that very well. Dimitri and everyone, and I know that Adolphe Menjou made a movie with him in the 50s, and we were in Germany, and Elia Kazan was directing it. It was terrible for him because he was one of the ones that turned in the Hollywood 10, and he said they all had mixed up that he was one of the Hollywood 10, and so he didn't hardly get hired for work. And Elia Kazan suffered terribly because he went to his friends and said, do you mind, you've already been turned in if I mention your name, and they didn't, and they never let him forget it the rest of his life. It was a terrible thing that happened. Dimitri wasn't able to direct. He was this great director, and they really weren't communists. They didn't even know what communism was. They were all from the Actors Studio. I mean, I'm now a member of the Actors Studio. I mean, you know, we're just not communists. I was so bloody naive. I mean, I just didn't even pay attention. I didn't get it. Quite frankly, I just was too young to pay attention to it. It didn't, I mean, I was like the Motion Picture Alliance. I was told I had to join it. Why? So people will know you're not a communist. What's a communist? And no, it didn't. After we got, I got a contract to Paramount. Paramount sent John Wayne, Chill Wills, Greer Garson, so many of us on through Texas called Movie Time USA to every studio had a group of boys and girls, actors and actresses, stars and starlets, go to a different state. We got Texas, took us 2 weeks. And on a bus, stopping off at every single town, so they would meet us and realize that Hollywood people are just Hollywood, we're just people. And there is no such thing as communism, and fortunately I was with John Wayne. So you better believe there was no such thing as communism. We had beaten it, and the heck with McCarthy.
I definitely think Roswell did, in fact, have an impact on filmmakers in the early 50s. Roswell, the incident, was 1947, and it was, probably took a few years of projects to gel to come out about that subject matter. And so around 1951, beginning with The Thing from Another World, films of aliens invading our planet started, including right up to 1953 and through the 50s, Invaders from Mars from 1953. Now, there were science fiction films prior to that, but they really didn't involve aliens invading our planet, which Roswell would have put the germ in people's minds. Prior to that, there were French films from the silent era, German films like Metropolis from 1926, and even films like Universal doing The Invisible Ray, which is science fiction, but not really aliens from another world. So definitely Roswell, I think, had an impact on filmmakers. It made the news, it made AP back in 1947.
Well, there was even rumors that the flying saucer things, which started in like 47 or something like that, were probably from Russia.
Rocket ship XM, well, that was an interesting, that was at the beginning of my career. And I think that the film Destination Moon was going to be coming out, and it was a big production. And it was due out in about 2 or 3 weeks or whatever. And Lipper, the Lipper company, producer, director, decided to try to beat them. So they called it Rocket Ship XM, and they gathered up the performers. The second day or third day that he had decided to do this, they had us out on the desert area between New Orleans and Las Vegas out there. Nothing but rock and sand. And that was supposed to represent the moon or whatever it was. And of course we had no script, we had a baby,
there were science fiction films prior to that, but they really didn't involve aliens invading.
It was such a funny deal. We finally wrote a script, and we finally
prior
did
to that, there were French films from the silent era, German films like Metropolis from 1926,
$250,000 to make the film.
Universal doing The Invisible Ray, which is
until they
science
got
fiction,
the script, and
but not really aliens from another world. So definitely Roswell, I think, had an impact on
the desert.
It made the news, it made AP
the mountain there is,
back in 1947.
And turning to each other occasionally, and then they dubbed in the sound later. But it made a fortune. And I was interested in space anyway. And to me, it's, I think, one of the great and necessary things that we do consider the moon and the possibilities there.
The Man from Planet X, for example, that film is maybe we're the monsters and not the aliens, where you have this alien invader come down, and he looks scary, he looks different, and people are afraid of him, and there's one particular scientist that is really using the alien for his own ends. And so it kind of turns the table where, who are the real monsters? Is it maybe these aliens, or is it maybe some of us?
I remember one night coming home from the movie, having seen The Man from Planet X, and laying in bed, and then getting ready to go to sleep, and then laying there, and I could, the way my bedroom was set up, I could look out into the hallway that we had.
They had to do that because they weren't, there was no space for anything else.
But then you got something like Day the Earth Stood Still, which I think is still one of the great classic science fiction films, even though it's a slow film. I mean, it's not a real moving, bombastic thing, you know, but there's a lesson there. You know, they're a little ticked off because what we're doing, and they, you know, stop it or we're going to take care of you. That'd probably be the best thing could ever happen to us right now.
I came here to give you these facts. But if you threaten to extend your violence, this earth of yours will be reduced to a burned out cinder.
In that particular case, Michael Rennie, who played the alien, was bringing a source of intelligence and education on how we could defeat diseases on this planet. But of course, the fear overrode what his real purpose was, and we were out to get him and do in this alien because he's different. So there's those kind of underlying themes there, and Robert Wise did it beautifully in The Day the Earth Stood Still.
I think that that this movie, apart from all the other ones that were from that era, had something to say. It spoke pretty directly to MAD, where people of an age will understand that, but rather than the government.
And it was part of pop culture. It was like the hula hoop. Everyone was looking for flying saucers. Kids were throwing hubcaps up in the air and running for Polaroid cameras. And it was something that filmmakers saw, hey, everyone's talking about flying saucers and flying discs. So the movies started and they kept coming. There were films for the teenagers, like Teenagers from Outer Space, and there were more thoughtful films as well, like The Day the Earth Stood Still, Earth versus the Flying Saucers, and films like that.
They actually presented a story and an engaging story, I think. I mean, it holds up today, I think, as well or better than most of the 1951 movies, you know. And they did it in a really thoughtful manner. It did try and address a situation that we're still dealing with, frankly. We're all concerned about a dirty bomb somewhere, you know, and at least, I mean, the Russians weren't suicidal. So I think that whole thing about the Russians being, you know, a threat was overblown so that we could, and this goes to Eisenhower warning us about the industrial military complex or whatever it was, and this was a direct slap in the face to that.
Probably from about 1947 to 1951, there weren't even a lot of horror movies being produced, but they were running that circuit. There were reruns. Back then, you know, we didn't have TV reruns. We had theater reruns, and all the Universal classics were still on the screen. And then suddenly there was the influx of these invaders from outer space, movies like The Thing from Another World, which is my personal favorite science fiction film. It's just so perfectly directed, and again, ends in the final line of the film, not being a spoiler really with the story, but the final line is keep watching the skies. And that's what everyone was doing at that time, and that and The War of the Worlds from 1953, another great film produced by George Powell, again, you know, inciting the aliens coming in and invading.
So The Man from Planet X, it coasted in. It opened a week before The Thing. I think they did that deliberately, but it came out and it got the benefit of this huge wave of interest that was connected with The Thing, and which was a superior picture in every way. The Thing was a serious picture about it, and very well done.
Well, 5 was was so alarming, and there was so much anxiety in the country at the time that it kind of turned people off because it was so grim. And it is, you know, the Holocaust, the end of the world. So it didn't do too well at the box office. Movie, and it had a lot to say about where the country might be headed. But I think the time is worse now than it was then because of all the lying from the politicians. I thought, how in the hell do you...
Captive women, it was a very interesting idea. It anticipated Planet of the Apes because this was about people who had survived, some people who had survived an atomic war. And they were living, the people who, I was one of what these illiterates who wrote it called mutates. We were survivors of an atomic war. Somehow the norms had been in a better place. They were richer, or they lived underground to begin with, or something, who knows. But I don't know why some people survived and some didn't. Maybe they came from a different part of the country. I said, oh, I've always wanted to go to New York. I wonder what it's like. And then they got there and they found what it's like is it's Mutateville. The people who lived in New York were all scorched.
We're witnessing the secret of creation.
This could be the beginning of the end for the human race. For what men first thought were meteors or the often ridiculed flying saucers are in reality the flaming vanguard of the invasion from Mars.
Well, first of all, it is obvious that there has to be life somewhere else. We are not the only ones. My God, the universe is enormous, infinite. We are the only ones? Forget it. But where is it? The closest thing that it could be in our own solar system would be Mars. All the others are impossible, totally, unless it's fire demons or something. So Mars became the one where people say, maybe we are neighbors to somebody else. And I think that's why Mars became, and then of course came this whole thing with the canals, which weren't canals at all, and that made people think, well, if they're canals, somebody must have built them, you know. And I think that's how it all came about. And people really did believe that.
When you look back on it, and I think as I've been speaking to so many people and everyone else's opinions, that I began to think about it, I said, H.G. Wells was so upset with England confiscating half the world with British imperialism that he wrote War of the Worlds because he wanted to prove how somebody could come in and just annihilate you, take over, and what are you going to do?
Probably because people need enemies. And it becomes sometimes we exhaust all the enemies you have right here. There's enough of them, but still. So, I mean, how often can you make the Nazis and you need somebody else, you need something else, something that is preferably unknown.
because the unknown is almost much more scary than something you know.
Isn't Mars the red planet? There you go. We hit that on the snout, didn't we? I think they were limited in their scope and imagination, and they needed a villain, and the Martians have always had, or certainly outer space, the threat of outer space people, because we've not been able to make peace with our fellow neighbors on Earth, and they assume that the Martians are going to be evil. They might come and save our planet. I hope they do, because something's going to have to be done for us soon.
Mars, evidently, I'm guessing, now that we found out that life could have existed there, and I think we were sophisticated to know early on that no one's going to be living on Jupiter. I mean, they just weren't even, they weren't solid, they were gases. So it's either the moon or Mars.
Well, do you remember the Orson Welles broadcast in 1938? Thousands of people fled New Jersey because they thought they were being invaded from Mars. They really believed it. Oh, this was quite a thing. I had just arrived in this country at that time, and I was very impressed with being invaded from Mars already.
Well, George Powell, first of all, he seems like he was an awfully nice guy. Every interview I've seen, people I've talked to that have worked with him, it just seemed like he was a wonderful, wonderful guy. We know him from, of course, War of the Worlds, When Worlds Collide, and The Time Machine, and many, many other films. I think his last film was Doc Savage, based on the pulp character. But his films all had a real nice feel to them. He's also known for doing puppet tunes prior to his feature films, which were little animated films, stop motion, which were fantastic too. A real quality guy.
Yeah, when Jack Crucian and Paul Birch and I were the three people that discovered the flying saucer, and we're talking about it and looking at it, and one of us says, let's go talk to them, and Jack Crucian, as the Mexican, says, well, what do we say? And I say, welcome to California. Now that's pretty funny, isn't it? And we go over to say welcome, and zap, we get disintegrated.
What are we going to say to them?
Welcome to California. Come on.
We're friends! Yeah! We're friends! Yeah!
It scared me. I look today and I go, that's a scary movie. The way the dun, dun, and it's not big, it's small, and that's what makes it even scarier, because it looks so ordinary, and then in come the slick ships, and so that simplicity, juxtapositioned against the sleekness of the Avanti-styled ships. It made your brain do something different than it did in any other of the horror movies, because it was so super advanced, that design with the ship. And then when you saw The Martian, and nobody had done the throbbing veins, and it was so short. So you go again, 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 and you never see it again. And that even adds to the mystery of what it was all about, because all of LA gets wiped out. And we think it's the end, and then they get hit by the flu. You know, you go, aha, right, us too. Why not Martians?
Something's happening.
I would help my dad in the lab from time I could almost walk. So whenever in the summer or when after school, he would come and get me if he had a special job to do, or mostly it was clean the lab after him because producer was coming in to inspect a piece and he didn't have time to clean the lab, something like that. He took a break at 4 in the afternoon. He had been working on The Martian for War of the Worlds and had first designed one that was 6 feet tall, 7 feet. I said 7, but I think it's more like 6. And when they went to do the farm scene, they saw the set, and the set was so small, they knew the Martian couldn't fit in there. So they couldn't rebuild the set because it was a really low budget. So they decided the Martian had to be changed, but they had to stay on schedule. They couldn't change the schedule, so it was only 24 hours to make the Martian smaller.
He was a little startling. Originally, he was 6 feet tall, and they Gomorrah, it was entirely too large. And so he and his daughter, when they brought him out, they said, no, he'd be more menacing if he were smaller. So they worked all night on him. They worked all night on the little one, and then brought it back the next day, and they didn't have enough time to do the arms in proportion to the smaller body. So that's why the Martian has these huge, waving arms about him. But it hadn't cured yet. It was still very soft and very wet. They wanted to put it liver all over it, and Paramount said, well, George Bell says, I think liver's a bit much. So they really had to put it on him very carefully because it was ready to just come apart at the seams. It was so delicate. It wasn't a man in a Martian suit walking around. He said you didn't know how it motivated, how it moved. It had no idea.
Then when Charlie saw it, he was so proud. He could not believe that it came out so well, and that was that was one of his proudest monsters. I would say that was he was most proud of that monster, and he was so surprised that it got such recognition. He never got over that. It got that, that people were so taken by it.
Judging from the sneak preview that they had that night at the Fairfax Theater on Beverly and Fairfax, when the movie was over with, it was totally silent. It wasn't that they were startled. The audience evidently was not expecting anything quite as vivid, because we had we were just 10 years from World War II. We had beaten everybody. We were a superior. And then suddenly the idea, just as H.G. Wells had written, the idea that we were so imperialistic, or thought that we were so superior, that something from outer space, something somewhere could come and just beat the pants off of you. That was rather startling. People actually did walk out of the theater talking to one another, very quiet, looking around at the skies, very much like The Thing, look to the skies. I love that last line in that movie. No, there was quite I would say a lot of apprehension.
George Pyle did that in a lot of his films. He always ended the films with hope. Like The Time Machine, the original book, it's pretty bleak at the end. Well, George didn't want to end it that way, so he ended it with hope. He's going back now and hoping things are going to work out. War of the Worlds, they kill the bad guys. When worlds collide, they go to another planet, and there's hope. I mean, his films are always full of hope, and that's the way he was. He was full of hope all the time, and that's good. I mean, we need those kind of films, I think, to kind of show, yeah, we're still here, and it isn't as bad as it was, or maybe it never was as bad as we thought.